we gon' fight all day and night until we get it right. What side are you on, my people? What side are you on? What side are you on, my people? What side are you on? We on the freedom. Marsha P. Johnson was a freedom fighter, and she taught us how to fight. So we gon' fight all day and night until we get it right. What side are you on, my people? What side are you on?
What side are you on? Welcome to another edition of Confidently Speaking with DOC. I am your host, David Doc Shirey, author of the book, Rare Confidence, Strategies and Inspiration to Strengthen Your Belief that you can achieve anything. I know I promised not to sing again, but that's a great jam, and I was caught up in the moment. We have got a great show for you tonight. And before we get to tonight's guest, there's a couple things that I feel like I need to get off my chest real quick. And, you know, change is often hard. It's hard in our society. It's hard in America. But at seminal moments, easy for me to say, like we're living in right now, it is absolutely, most definitely necessary. You know, my hope would be that in our lifetime, society truly becomes colorblind. It's going to take all of us to do that, to collectively do our part, whatever that part may be. I saw a video the other day that absolutely broke my heart. This young kid, he couldn't be more than 7 or 8 years old. He's shooting hoops in his family's driveway. This is probably the doorbell cam. And he sees a cop car drive by and he hides out of fear. I mean, that just absolutely broke my heart when I saw that. And that's not right. That should not happen in the United States of America. And hopefully, collectively, we can do something to change that. The New Yorker magazine has a cover coming out next week that Confidently Speaking with DOC has obtained a preview copy here. And the cover embodies the history of violence inflicted upon Black people in America. And I think it's really, really well done if you have a chance to check it out. And if you haven't seen it yet, I urge you to watch Netflix's 13th, which our guest tonight suggested that I watch, and I'm really glad that he did. The show explores racial inequality in the United States. It focuses on the fact that the nation's prisons are disproportionately filled with African Americans. You know, this coming Monday will mark, I think, the 1 month mark since George Floyd was murdered, I believe, on Memorial Day. And early on, there was some rioting and looting, and there was some ugliness. But for the last couple weeks, you know, America has shown up and shown out and has had nothing but, for the most part, peaceful protests to really highlight racial inequality in America. And I want to show a clip that kind of shows large cities and small towns alike coming together for this cause.
And now Fairfax. So anywhere between the Hollywood and West Hollywood area, you're going to want to use some of the alternate streets. You could stick, instead of taking Hollywood Boulevard, you could take Franklin. You could take Santa Monica. Sunset's not going to be a good option because what I'm showing you now is Sunset Boulevard, and you can see that the protesters are making their way through here, and they did make that turn on at Fairfax, so we'll show you that next.
So that clip had three parts to it. The first part was Los Angeles last Sunday, an absolute sea of humanity. And then the second part of it was really small town America coming out and showing their support to try to facilitate change. And then the last part of that was, I believe, Charlotte, North Carolina, where there was some beautiful street art. All right. As always, please be a part of the program tonight. Let's see your comments. Let's see your questions. Everything that's respectful, I hope we'll try to get as many of them on the air as possible. And if you could do me a favor and hit that share button, what that will do will allow the program to get a much broader reach. And then in turn, that will allow us to continue to attract incredible guests and even guests of a national scale. At this point in time, I want to introduce our guest tonight. Skyler Bennett is an actor. He's a singer. He's a dancer. He just graduated from Pace University, where he spent 4 years in New York City. He has appeared on stage in Newsies. He has appeared in Oklahoma, Mamma Mia, Grease, amongst many others. Skyler is an incredibly talented young man. He's also very passionate about social justice and change, and he's been very involved in the Black Lives Matter movement. We are fortunate enough to have him here with us tonight. Let me bring him on now. Skyler, how are you?
I'm doing well, Doc. How are you?
I am doing great. Skyler, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on the show with us tonight. You and I had a nice long chat last week, and you opened my eyes to some things I wasn't aware of, and I was incredibly impressed with your level of knowledge on the issues at hand, as well as your passion about it. And my first question to you, Skyler, I know it was important to you to be known on this show as a Black Lives Matter advocate as opposed to anything else. Why was that so important to you, Sky?
So my reason for appearing on your show today is to do precisely that, to advocate for the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm not here to lead. I'm not here to educate. There are plenty of organizers and educators and activists who are doing the work on social media, who are doing the work on the street. My only goal in appearing on the show today would be to change people's paradigms, inspire critical thinking and self-reflection, and to promote actionable steps towards Black liberation in the United States, as much as I can do with my privilege as a white person.
Great. So can you talk to us a little bit, Sky, about what your involvement has been in the movement?
So I have no official ties to the organization in any official capacity. I've been to a few protests. I've been donating to different organizations whenever I can with the means that are available to me. I've been educating myself. There is an incredible amount of academia and educational resources concerning the movement and the history of white supremacy and systemic racism in America. And it's just been very eye-opening, and I'm trying to do my part in doing my due diligence and exercising everything I can in order to promote the liberation of Black people.
Sky, what are the concrete steps, asks, demands that BLM is asking for?
So Black Lives Matter started in 2013 as a response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murderer. And essentially the broad asks of the organization are to dismantle white supremacy and systemic racism and violence against Black people, be it from law enforcement, discriminatory policies, vigilante justice, or any number of things that threaten Black advancement and prosperity. And this graphic that you're showing right now, all of these different points fall under that same blanket, definitely.
Now, I noticed that one of them, Skyler, was an ask to take police out of schools. And I wasn't aware of any of this until I started preparing for this program tonight. And I saw this statistic that really surprised me. And it was that after Columbine happened in 1999, over 10,000 school police officers were hired across the country in case a school shooting happened. And yet here we are 21 years later, and none of those 10,000 police officers have stopped a single school shooting, but instead they've arrested over 1 million kids, mostly African-American kids, for relatively benign behavior violations.
Yeah,
that was pretty eye-opening to me.
It's really startling. So what happened was in the late 90s, as a response to mass shootings in schools, the government took precautions to put officers in schools to curtail any of those kinds of events, even though the juvenile crime rate has been decreasing since 1995. Instead, the institution of police in schools has led to something called the school-to-prison pipeline. And the school-to-prison pipeline is a concept where the educational system and the systems of discipline that exist within the educational system are setting up students, particularly Black students, to be introduced into the criminal justice system early. Black students are 3 times more likely to be suspended than white students. In the United States, Black students make up 16% of the school population, and they make up over 32% of those expelled, while white students make up anywhere from 31 to 40% of the school population. And they are 31% of students expelled, but they are 51% of the student population. You see a similar pattern that you do with the police in real life that you do in schools. Black kids are more likely to be arrested, and on top of that, they're more likely to be disciplined for subjective misbehaviors, such as insubordination, disrespect, disorderly conduct, things that are largely decided by the teacher to be punishable, whereas white kids are more likely to be disciplined for things that can be concretely proven, like vandalism, smoking in school, etc.
All right, I want to dig into this idea, this mantra we've been hearing so much about over the last week or two of defund the police. We've heard defund the police. We've heard dismantle the police. We've heard disband the police. There's a lot of confusion out there amongst the public. There's even mixed messages that are coming from some Democratic leaders. And quite frankly, this whole movement, this mantra, is coming from the left. So I want to play a clip of some leaders, some congressional leaders, and some mixed messages they're sending regarding defunding the police.
Nobody is going to defund the police. We can restructure the police forces, reimagine policing. That is what we're going to do.
You can't really reform a department that is rotten to the root. What you can do is rebuild the current infrastructure that exists as policing in our city should not exist anymore.
I think we're being drawn into this false choice idea. We'll use different language to describe it, but fundamentally we must have reformation and transformation.
Sky, there's a group called the American Women's Coalition, and they think that the specific version of verbiage of defund the police is toxic. They want to basically do the same thing, but they don't like that verbiage. They're talking about transforming the police, reforming, rebuilding, retrain, reprioritize. They think that we absolutely should stop saying defund the police because slogans matter, and they think that that is toxic. And then there was this from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. It was a cartoon from last week. And I think this is what happens when a lot of the public hears this phrase, defund the police, right? They basically think of a guy with a gun who's going to come up to them on the street and say, all right, it's time for me now to defund you since we've already defunded the police. And then the flip side of that are folks who are in favor of this and say, listen, we've already defunded our schools, defunded our national parks, our environmental protections. We've defunded Medicare. We've defunded food safety. We've defunded the United States Postal Service, the sciences, and the arts. And wow, there's a lot going on out there, Sky. What's your take on all this?
So first of all, I think that the Women's Coalition is absolutely correct in how much attention they're paying to semantics. I think that the phrase defund the police strikes fear into the hearts of a lot of people, because whenever you talk about defunding the police, you talk about divesting from the police force and reallocating funds. I think that even though defund the police is probably a scary term, it is the truest representation of what actually needs to happen. Police departments all over the country are grossly overfunded, and the main driving ideology behind defunding the police is that you take the money and the resources that are being given to these police departments to militarize themselves, and you invest it in community initiatives that are going to prevent crimes from happening in the first place. If you invest in education, if you invest in healthcare, if you invest in youth services and affordable housing, studies have shown that whenever those programs have more funding and resources, crime goes down and the need for police goes down. So nobody is saying that we don't need law enforcement, because crime still does happen and we do need to maintain order in some way. But it's absurd that these small police departments can roll up to riots with all of this riot gear and all of this military style equipment, but frontline healthcare workers fighting the pandemic have to start GoFundMes for personal protective equipment.
All right, I want to show you another clip, Skylar, from CNN on Allison Camerata's show. She had on Lisa Bender, and Lisa Bender is the president of the Minneapolis City Council. And I'm going to show the clip, and then I have a question for you.
Do you understand that the word dismantle or police free also makes some people nervous? For instance, what if in the middle of the night my home is broken into? Who do I call?
Yes, I mean, I hear that loud and clear from a lot of my neighbors, and I know, and myself too, and I know that that comes from a place of privilege.
Now, when I watched that live, I saw Allison's expression, and Allison's a fairly liberal, and she was shocked at the answer. And I think when you see that answer, she's basically saying that, hey, the expectation in America of calling 911 and expecting the police to come, that's your privilege showing. So I guess my question to you is the expectation through all of this to raise everybody up to an equal point of justice, or maybe to lower the expectations to bring everybody down to an equal justice? Because when I listen to Lisa Bender talk, I think that there's a lot of people that probably would not get behind that idea.
I think that ideally we want to bring everybody up to a similar level of justice. And I think that the woman who was speaking about privilege is absolutely correct. For white Americans, the institution of the police has represented safety, and we know that we can reliably call 911 and that our interests and our bodies will be protected. That's why Amy Cooper was so ready to call the cops on that bird watcher, because she had an implicit understanding of the fact that cops are more likely to have positive, non-harmful interactions with white people than black people. We have never been made to, white people have never been made to question our safety in the face of law enforcement, because there's not a storied history of white people being disproportionately targeted by law enforcement. So it absolutely does come from a place of privilege. So I think ideally what we'd want to do is we'd want to restructure the law enforcement so that all communities are respected equally, which they are absolutely not now at all.
All right, I want to talk for a minute, Skylar, about Black Lives Matter. And I want to separate the words Black Lives Matter from the organization. And I want to get your opinion on this. So follow my train of thought here, if you will. The words Black Lives Matter, I don't see how anybody in America cannot get behind that. You know, and I don't want to hear this all lives matter stuff. Of course, all lives matter. But saying that right now is like saying after 9/11, all buildings matter. Well, the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers are the buildings that right now need our attention. So 100%. The organization Black Lives Matter has a platform. And within that platform, they have a lot of political statements. And just to give you an example, one of their statements is they support the BDS movement, or boycott, divest, and sanction of Israel for their what they believe to be their treatment of Palestinian refugees. The state of Israel believes that the BDS movement is anti-Semitic. Many Americans feel that way too. That's a totally separate issue. We could debate another time whether people believe that or not. But my question is, because Black Lives Matter as an organization has other political leanings and platforms, is it fair for people to separate the words Black Lives Matter with the organization?
Again, I can only speak to so much of that. The Israel-Palestine situation is very messy. I am not that educated on it. I think, and again, I can only speak from my white experience. Sure. I would argue that it is more important to promote the tangible ways that Black people can stop being disenfranchised instead of getting caught up in the politics of an organization. Because even if somehow the infrastructure of the BLM organization were to fall apart somehow, like however that would happen, there would still be a fight for Black liberation with or without a organization. The ideology of Black Lives Matter, I don't think necessarily needs a concrete organization for the message to continue. It helps. It gives a platform. It helps organize. It helps raise money. But ultimately, to quote V for Vendetta, ideas are bulletproof.
All right. So a couple weeks ago, I think it was 3 weeks ago Saturday, it was the first really big protest here in the city of Pittsburgh. And I know you were there, Sky. And it started out as a really peaceful protest. And then this young man, who was later identified a day later and arrested in his parents' house and was later brought to the Allegheny County Jail by his parents, really incited, I don't know if you want to call it a riot, but he was identified in a video that I'm going to show in a minute, inciting violence against the police. He's the one who really started to bust up a police car. And what you're going to see in this video, you literally see, I think it's a young African-American guy who's filming it, who's saying, "Stop it. It's not us, it's the white guys." I want you to watch this.
Oh, somebody is busting up the cop car. No. What did I tell you? What did I tell you? It is not black people. It is not black people. What are you doing? What are you doing?
I don't care. You're not helping them.
Look at this. This man just busted up this cop car. And y'all say we are the rioters. Y'all say we are the problem. It is white people. Stop, my guy, stop.
Did you see that live, Skylar?
I was down the street towards the bottom of the hill by PPG Paints whenever that happened. I didn't know at the time that it was a white guy starting it. I just remember people screaming, "Yo, they set a cop car on fire." And then everybody was like, "Oh my God." At this point, I wasn't aware that that it was a white instigator of violence, but that instance of him starting the violence in what was an otherwise peaceful demonstration speaks to a greater issue that's happening in the movement right now, and that's white people co-opting it for their own purposes. And that's something that I really wanted to talk about. I don't know if you saw that video of all the white Hollywood actors, and they're all in the black and white video, and it's like, "I take responsibility for racism," and it's really intense and really emotional. That is sort of a microcosm of the bigger problem of what's happening right now. The most important thing that white people can do, our opinions really aren't that relevant, because the oppression that's being battled is not something that we ever have to face or worry about. All we can do is amplify black voices, support the movement, and take tangible steps financial support to the movement that's happening.
Sky, what is when you're at these protests, do you get a sense of a heavy outside influence, whether it may be from the left or the right? Whether do you see now? When I say fake Antifa people, because I don't really know that if there's a real organization or it's loose or people were dressed up that way. Did you see these people at the protests?
No, I didn't. But a couple weeks ago, I was at another protest, and there were two white guys dressed in all black, similar to that. And I let my friends that I was there know. I was like, okay, I don't know about these guys, because they were trying to like start chants. They were saying F Joe Biden and da 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 and all these things that were just completely irrelevant. White people also shouldn't be starting chants. White people shouldn't really be taking the lead in this kind of thing. We're just beginning to chime in on the conversation of systemic oppression that Black folks have been fighting against for 400 years. So now is not the time to make our voices heard, because those are the only voices that have been heard throughout history. So, yeah.
All right. Sky, let's turn our attention to cancel culture. And Urban Dictionary has a number of definitions. This one I thought was most apropos to what's kind of going on in our country right now. Cancel culture is when someone is called out on social media for something they did or for an opinion in the present or past that turns society against them, and it goes viral and it ruins that person's career or online popularity. And in a lot of cases, it ruins their ability to make a livelihood. And I know when you and I chatted the other day, you're a fan of cancel culture.
I think it's a double-edged sword. I'm going to go off on a little tangent. Sure. Something that I think is very relevant to understand about cancel culture is, okay, so in the 1930s, the famous movie stars of the 1930s, like Clark Gable, Humphrey Bogart, Ingrid Bergman, that whole thing, their entire career and their public perception was ensured by the studio system. So basically these studios and these executives would decide the roles that these actors can take. So that's how Humphrey Bogart came to be known as, like, you know, the cool guy with the trench coat and the fedora, because those were the only roles he could take. His public perception and all the perception of these very famous people were completely shaped by people in higher positions of power controlling how the public saw them. The reason that cancel culture has become a thing is because in the age of social media and mass communication and mass information, the opinions and perceptions of everyday individuals are becoming relevant in the popular perception of very visible figures. So if Twitter decides that Kevin Hart is canceled for homophobic tweets, then there's only really so much that a PR team can do, because word gets around. And I think that the double-edged aspect of cancel culture, the negative aspect of it is that there is a tendency to form an immediate mob mentality and perhaps subscribe to groupthink before everything about a situation is known. I think conversely, the understanding that everything that you say and do online is monitored with such scrutiny provides the impetus to really examine and consider the ways that your words and actions might appear, or the effect they may have regardless of your intent. So like every time I've read about someone being canceled for saying something stupid, it's always a learning experience for me. So again, I don't really support or deny cancel culture. I think it's a tremendously powerful concept, and you have to utilize it in a way that you can grow from.
Sure, and this is not necessarily directed at you, Sky, but I think one of the issues would be with cancel culture is, you know, who is the ultimate arbiter of all things that are just and right and good, right? We all have many different levels of what's right, what's fair, what's just. And I mean, there are times it absolutely has a positive effect. One of them just yesterday, right? I mean, Aunt Jemima, Quaker Oats went ahead and retired the Aunt Jemima brand and logo, and basically acknowledged that the Aunt Jemima brand was based on a racial stereotype. And, you know, I've been following social media very close for these last couple of days, especially about this. I used to be in advertising and this stuff really piques my interest. And a lot of people came on and said, hey, listen, the woman who was depicted as Aunt Jemima actually lived a tremendous life because of that. And I saw where her great-grandson was really disappointed that her legacy was going to be retired. But that's just one family. But there's no doubt that the origins of it was based in racism. And when you think about social media, wow, the power of social media in today's day and age. I want to show a clip because this young lady on TikTok got the whole Aunt Jemima retire that brand thing rolling with this TikTok.
Baby, you hungry? Let me fix you some breakfast. Aunt Jemima? Did you know the name Aunt Jemima means slave mammy of the plantation South? Did you know the founder, Chris Rutz, a white man, got the name after attending a minstrel show? Think blackface. Did you also know he hired former slave Nancy Green to be his very own Aunt Jemima, where she went around cooking pancakes and telling people stories of the good old South? And afterwards, they could take home a box of Aunt Jemima and that feeling of having their very own mammy. Not today. Black Lives Matter, people. Even over breakfast.
She's outstanding. And when I first saw her and I read a couple articles about her, that really that video got the whole thing going. And, in 2020, I mean, anybody that has a message can listen, they'll let anybody have a talk show these days. I mean, it's really amazing. But, when you talk about cancel culture and online shaming, there's a flip side of that too. Sometimes it goes from the ridiculous to the sublime. I'll give you an example. The Berklee College of Music in Boston was forced to put out a press release apologizing for allowing the Boston police to use their restrooms during one of the nights of protesting. And, sometimes I think that's just like, if we're going to allow mob mentality to bully colleges and schools and corporations and stuff like that, I don't know. Your thoughts?
Personally, I agree with that condemnation of Berklee. I think that anytime you aid organizations that have proven to be harmful, be it on an institutional, financial, or using the bathroom level, you need to be held accountable. I know that it might seem a bit extreme, but I think ultimately, if it is everybody knows the ways in which police are terrorizing communities of color. There's no controversy about that. So for Berklee just to allow that to happen, then they're sending the message that they're very clear about letting the oppressors in this case have sanctuary, even if it's just to pee.
Sky, we have a question for you from Stephen Cohen. Can you share a public official, Sky, whose leadership you respect today in the fight for social justice?
I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is an amazing political figure currently right now. She has a very storied history of fighting for marginalized communities, fighting against very oppressive conservative systems. And she is an inspiration to young women of color to become more involved in the political arena, which is populated by 90% white people. And America is not 90% white people. I think that if you have more people like her who are willing to expound upon what could perhaps be seen as radical ideas, more individuals like that will lead to more positive, effective change in this country. So she has my respect, and she's a celebrity. I hope she runs for president one day.
Sky, I want to read you this quote by the president, Theodore Roosevelt. The most practical kind of politics is the politics of decency. And you and I had a conversation about this last week, and I thought it was eye-opening. I thought it was really interesting. As a matter of fact, when you gave me the answer to this statement I posed to you, I said, I got to have you on the show because it was that unique. And you and I had a nice, healthy conversation last week about a lot of stuff. And I shared with you that I thought one of the problems in society today is the divisiveness. And I shared with you how back when I was your age, like 4 years ago, and when I was your age, many years ago, Sky, and I was in college, politicians would debate their issues, and then afterward they would go and have a couple drinks and have dinner together, and they usually would get it together and come to some sort of compromise and come up with solutions. Here in 2020, our leaders on both sides, they can't stand each other, and we see it all the time in the way they talk to and about each other, and then that kind of filters down to the populace, and we all see it the way people talk to each other on social media, and it's really a lot of ugliness out there. And when I shared that with you, you said, I think we need more divisiveness.
I think so. To your point, I think that whenever you prioritize decency or manners or politeness, whenever you're discussing very sensitive and very urgent issues like race, you are taking away the urgency. If you are too focused on maintaining a good social standing with the person whose opinions you disagree with, if those person's opinions are very destructive or harmful, then you shouldn't be worried about how you feel about them. I am not worried about making Trump supporters angry. I mean, yes, ideally we would like to have constructive conversations and we would like to have a meaningful dialogue with no animosity, but to a certain point, you can't continue to entertain respectability politics, because eventually if you prioritize civility over action, nothing really happens. I was having conversations like these a lot with people in my family, and I was talking about these changes that are happening, and they kept saying, okay, like, I totally support these changes. They absolutely need to happen, but you need to understand it's going to take a really long time for people to adapt to these radical changes that are happening so quickly in our country. And to paraphrase James Baldwin, like, how much time do we need for progress? In the time that it takes for white people to become comfortable with everything that's happening, in the time that it's taking for us to adjust our emotions and our comfort level, people are dying. So time is of the essence. We can't prioritize everybody making a smooth, comfortable, familiar transition into this, because the transition is necessary and long overdue, and we cannot continue to prioritize white feelings over Black lives.
Sky, educate me a little bit on the Black Trans Lives Matters movement. I really don't know much about it, and especially this is a shot from last Sunday in Brooklyn, where there was a Black Trans Lives Matters rally, an absolute huge turnout, as you can see there. Can you share with me the connection to to racial police brutality?
So again, as a cisgendered individual, cisgendered meaning that you identify as the gender that you were assigned at birth. In this case, you and I are both cisgender males. As a cisgender individual, all I can really say is that Black transgender individuals suffer a tremendous amount of disenfranchisement in society. On top of systemic racism, they have to also contend with systemic queerphobia and transphobia. The trans visibility in this country has only really become a thing in the last 10 years, from what I understand, even though transgender and non-binary individuals have been around for millennia. The graphic that you're showing right now, the two ladies on the left, Dominique Remy-Fells and Raya Milton, were two trans women who were recently murdered, and Oluwatoyin Salau was a young activist who tweeted about being sexually assaulted. A few hours later, she went missing, and her body was just recently discovered. So on top of the reason that that Black trans lives aren't getting as much play in the media as they deserve is because the murders of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor fit into the very storied and well-established history of violence towards cisgender Black individuals. But there is, again, because trans visibility has only recently become a thing. The World Health Organization, not until May 2019, said that people who identify as transgender have a mental disorder. Only a year ago, they just said that that wasn't a thing. So So on top of fighting for racial justice, Black trans individuals have to fight for gender justice too. So there is a tremendous amount of pressure on them, and equal attention needs to be paid for their liberation, because the issues of transphobia and queerphobia make the racism issue that much worse.
All right, Sky, I want to ask you a question about the cronizzle, the virus, and the protests. And because you raise a lot of terrific points, and there are flip sides to many of these discussions. So there are many on the right who believe that that there's a hypocrisy because of these enormous protests and all these people out there that are basically on top of each other, where we had people telling us to stay home for 3 months, and now they're not saying anything of the sort. I'm going to play this clip, then I want to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think that people have been on to the media now for a while. The reason that the coronavirus sort of propaganda narrative was sustained is it had the backing of the medical establishment. But it was still a kind of fragile consensus, because it was all dependent upon maintaining a certain moral consistency. But the moment that the very same medical professionals and the very same politicians who had warned us, stay home, don't do this, don't do that, changed their tune when the protesters and the rioters and the large gatherings started occurring on the left, basically the whole thing collapsed. Intellectually, it became a joke.
So I want to get your thoughts in a second on whether you feel there's hypocrisy. But I will make a comment. One thing I do think has happened. I do think that there's a collective letting our guard down as a country since the protests have begun. Number one, it has taken over the airwaves. So the cronizzle is now on the back burner. We hear much more about what's going on with racial inequality, George Floyd, the cops being charged, the protests, than we do about the virus. And then we see these images, right, of tens of thousands of people literally on top of each other. So I think, and I know even personally, when I have been out and about, the sense I get is our guard is let down. But in terms of what Dinesh D'Souza just said in terms of hypocrisy, do you find that to be true, Sky?
My opinion on that is that it is undeniable that these demonstrations and large groups of people will contribute to a higher likelihood of people contracting the disease. I think what also needs to be kept in mind is that there is incontrovertible proof that COVID affects Black communities and communities of color at a disproportionately higher rate than it affects white people, again, because of those same systemic barriers that Black people have had to deal with for their entire presence in this country. It manifests in they're more likely to be essential workers, they are less likely to have access to adequate health care, and they are more likely to live in multi-generational households, which keeps them from socially distancing. If these folks who are more vulnerable to the virus are defying those orders in order to go out to the street and protest, it should be taken as a statement as to the severity of the issue of racism, which is also a public health crisis. So yeah, I think that everybody who is out in the streets protesting, it's not like they've forgotten about the coronavirus. I think that they're saying, yeah, we do know this is a thing. Black Lives Matter is a bigger thing right now.
Sky, I want to ask you a question about the politics surrounding the murder of George Floyd. I absolutely believe that President Trump is divisive in his rhetoric. He's not one to bring people together. His words divide. And that is unfortunate to have as the president of the United States. Yet as soon as George Floyd was murdered, there was outcry, go vote, go vote, go vote. And I just want to show this graphic, and I want to get your thoughts on it. This is the racist cop, I don't even want to say his name, who murdered George Floyd. He was a registered Democrat. He worked for a Democratic police chief. He was voted into office by a Democrat electorate. He had in a Democrat-controlled city, in a Democrat-controlled state, protected by a Democrat-controlled union. 18 complaints he had against him, and was let off the hook every time by a Democratic prosecutor who is now Senator Amy Klobuchar, who was a candidate for the presidency. So why immediately after this was, go vote? It really wasn't just a matter of go vote Trump out. It was go vote for everybody to get these people out, as if it's a political right versus left problem.
To that, I will say that racism has no allegiance to any particular political party. That was made very clear in the case of Amy Cooper, who was a registered Democrat, who had records of donating to the Obama administration and to Pete Buttigieg. If you remember from 13th in the mid-90s, Bill Clinton was enforcing the 3 strikes rule and mandatory minimums, and he enforced that crime bill. And he was a registered Democrat, and those policies completely targeted Black people. So you can ultimately hide behind the, you can hide behind any kind of title. You can call yourself progressive, whatever. I think that ultimately your actions speak louder than however you're registered. Like, just because, I mean, saying, oh, I can't be racist because I'm a Democrat is the same thing as saying I can't be racist because I have a Black friend. Okay, cool. Serial killers have friends who are alive. Like it just doesn't make any sense.
Let's talk a little bit about the statues coming down. Yeah. All over the country, we have local governments, right, that are taking them down either because they think it's the right thing to do or they're fearful they're going to be vandalized. We have protesters that are taking them down themselves. I got a kick out of this one sign I saw that said, if pulling down a statue of a slave trader ruins your way of life, you're either a racist or a pigeon. And I kind of got a kick out of that. But I saw some things that really made me shake my head too. There were some clear Civil War era racist statues that I totally get. I mean, why are they in town square? The most, usually these are not statues that are on the edge of town, right? They're in the middle of the most prominent places where people congregate. But then there were some statues, like in Philly, Matthias Baldwin, who was an early abolitionist who fought against slavery. And I saw that this statue had been vandalized. And then in Boston, there was a memorial that recognized the first all-volunteer Black regiment of the Union Army during the Civil War. I guess my question is, sometimes when these kind of things happen, is it really just, nobody at the time when there's a anger in the streets, people aren't taking the time necessarily to research who all these folks are?
I think that whenever passions are high and people are very upset, I think because there has been such a big increase in people just taking statues down, I think there is a tendency to look at statues of old white people and assume they are bad, which is not necessarily completely wrong. But I think in terms of taking these statues of Confederate leaders and enslavers down, that is not controversial at all. I mean, they are symbols of oppression and terror. Having these statues remain in states would be like putting up a statue of Hitler in Squirrel Hill. Like, for the Black, I mean, again, I can't speak for the Black community, but I think it's fair to say that the Confederate flag and figures of the Confederacy represent years of terror and murder and genocide and oppression. So to keep these statues up to argue for heritage or culture or historical whatever is completely absurd and baseless. If you want to have them so bad, put them in a museum and give them the correct historical context.
Sky, we have a question here. Do you take a worldview on defeating racism, or is it really focused on the United States?
I mean, again, as somebody who has never been directly targeted by racism, I can only speak to my experiences. I think that the goal ideally would be to eliminate racism in the world. The United States at this point in history has a uniquely bad race problem because we have people from all over the world. Naturally, tensions are going to rise. I think that one thing that could happen is if you begin to remedy the issues of race that exist in America, if you begin to adopt more inclusive and anti-racist policies, that same action and momentum could reverberate to different parts of the world, because every single state has had protests and 18 different countries have had Black Lives Matter protests. So it is a worldwide issue, and there is a worldwide understanding of racism and its detrimental effects on societies. So ultimately, I think that those of us here in the United States, we should focus all of our energy on focusing on the problems here. And then, I mean, racism isn't going away anytime soon. It's what this country was founded on and built on. So, I mean, yeah, that's a difficult question to answer. But yes, the ideal goal, it seems to me, would be to end racism, period, end of sentence.
And it's really been remarkable to see what's happened around the world. I mean, the support that the world community has shown for the Black community in America has been really, really amazing.
Yeah, definitely. Especially right now, we're seeing a critical mass of white people at these demonstrations. If you look at civil rights demonstrations throughout history, you'll see it's mostly members of the group that is being marginalized or being oppressed. Right now, we are, for whatever reason, the stars aligned, white people have finally woken up to the systems that our ancestors built and that we benefit from, that continue to oppress communities and perpetuate the systems of racism.
Sky, hang with me 1 minute. I need to give a plug for what we're doing here next week, if you would. Next week, we have got an unbelievable lineup. Tuesday night, man, am I excited to have Susie Shapiro on Tuesday night. Susie is an emergency and disaster documentary filmmaker and photographer. And she has spent 10 years in Zimbabwe. She's been on the front lines with FEMA. She just wrapped up putting together an entire project on documenting what is happening on America's southern border. And she has got stories and images that are just incredible. Really excited to have Susie on Tuesday night. And then Thursday night, we have my man, Dr. Danny Pompa on. Dr. Pompa is a health and wellness expert, and he is a weight loss expert. And listen, after the Cronizzle, the 7 pounds that you probably put on like me, we all need to learn some ways that we can take it off. Danny also is an expert on intermittent fasting. He has a unique take on it. I want to talk to Danny a little bit about the Cronizzle and herd immunity, as well as a bunch of other subjects. So we have got a great lineup next week. Skylar, one of the things that you asked me when we were talking, you asked if you could send over some information and some links in regards to Black Lives Matter. And I put them in a little graphic here. And I'm going to ask anybody who is interested to take a screenshot. I'm going to leave this up for a few seconds. On the left, you have some Instagram folks that are involved in the movement. In the top right, you've got some recommended viewing. Like I said, I did go ahead and watch 13th the other day, and it was incredibly eye-opening. And then if you want to donate to the cause, there are some links that you can do that. I'm going to leave this up for a few more seconds here if you would like to go ahead and take a screenshot of that. Sky, you've been amazing, man. You've been an amazing guest. I appreciate your passion, your knowledge, and the way that you were prepared for tonight. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience before I let you go?
We are in a turning point that is unprecedented in the history of the country. The onus right now is for white folks to take a back seat and adopt a position of listening and empathy, because right now we are uniquely postured to affect real positive, non-cosmetic racial change in this country that is long overdue. And we owe it to our fellow Black brothers and sisters to make this country more habitable and prosperous for everyone. Support Black-owned businesses, donate, educate yourself. This is tertiary, but don't ask your Black friends to educate you about racism. It is not their job to dig through their trauma and their experiences of oppression to educate you. Literally just Google it. Google systemic racism, Google mass incarceration, Google housing discrimination, and do the work.
Sky, again, you've been an amazing guest. I can't thank you enough. I appreciate it. I've always told you from way back in the day, I'm a big fan of yours. If I could buy stock in Skylar, you're going to be a star someday, and I'll be right there watching, my man. Thanks, Sky.
Thank you so much, Doc.
All right. Hey, listen, I've told everybody since day one, there are no subjects that we are going to avoid on this show, and that is my commitment to the audience here. I want to keep it interesting, and we're going to continue to bring on some amazing guests, and stay tuned next week. Thanks for watching. You've been a big part of tonight's show. I love you, and we will see you soon. Peace.